The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the fjords of Scandinavia in a soft, golden light that seemed almost unreal, as if the world itself were holding its breath. From the quiet villages nestled among the jagged cliffs, the wind carried whispers of the sea, its endless expanse, its restless waves, its promise of adventure beyond the familiar shores. To the men and women of this land, life was harsh but known. The forests were dense, the winters bitter, the work relentless. Yet even within the rhythms of toil and survival, a restlessness lingered, a pull toward something just beyond reach. It was as if the very earth and sky conspired to remind them that the world was far larger than their small, stone-built homes. The edge of the known world was not marked on any map, yet it existed vividly in the minds of those who dared to dream. Stories traveled along the coasts and up the rivers, carried by merchants, travelers, and old skalds with voices like wind through pine needles. Tales of distant lands, strange people, and seas that shimmered with colors unseen inspired awe, but also fear. And yet, for the Vikings, fear was never quite enough to stay their hands or anchor their hearts. The call of the unknown stirred something deeper than curiosity. It awakened a hunger, a longing, a sense that to stay rooted in the comfort of home was to remain incomplete. The sound of waves crashing against rocks became a kind of music, a rhythm that spoke of possibility. Each crack of a wave, each spray of salt water on weathered skin, reminded those who listened that the world extended far beyond the fjords and valleys they knew. They had heard the legends of lands where the sun dipped late into the winter, of forests so vast and silent that one could walk for days without encountering another soul, and of mountains that scraped the clouds themselves. These were not simply stories to be told by the hearth. They were invitations, challenges, and promises of glory and discovery. To venture beyond the familiar was to risk everything, yet to ignore that call was to betray the spirit that coursed through their veins. From the prow of a longship, the sea stretched endlessly, its horizon a delicate line where water met sky. There, the imagination could run wild, unfettered by the constraints of hearth and home. The sailors, men who had grown up hearing sagas of gods and giants, of cursed treasures and heroic deeds, felt a mingling of trepidation and exhilaration. Each wave they faced seemed like a question posed by the universe. Would they dare to follow its path, to meet whatever lay at the farthest reaches of the world? The ships themselves seemed almost alive, responding to the rhythm of hands on oars, to the subtle shift of wind in their sails. The sea demanded respect, demanded vigilance, demanded courage. And in return, it offered the possibility of seeing what no one else had seen, of touching the edge of the world itself. Life in the villages had its own quiet beauty, yet the monotony of routine, fishing, hunting, building, and tending to the fields, made the call of the horizon all the more compelling. Even in moments of warmth by the fire, when laughter and song filled the longhouse, there lingered a sense of something missing, a yearning that could only be answered by movement, by exploration. Children stared at the distant waves with wide eyes, imagining creatures that might lurk beneath, ships that might come from nowhere, and lands that might challenge all they had ever known. The elders, with their weathered faces and deep-set eyes, told stories not only to entertain but to instruct, to plant seeds of courage and imagination in the next generation. Every tale was a subtle reminder: the world was larger than the familiar, and life was meant to be tested against its mysteries. The horizon was more than a line. It was a boundary between the known and the infinite, a place where imagination could meet reality if one had the courage to go. And so, the restless among the Vikings, those with hearts attuned to possibility, who felt the thrill of uncertainty as acutely as they felt the sting of the cold wind, began to plan. They studied the stars with patient reverence, memorized the courses of rivers and currents, and listened to the sea as one might listen to an old friend. Each voyage became a meditation, a dialogue between human daring and the vast, indifferent natural world. With every passing day, the edge of the known world became less of a distant concept and more of an inevitable destination, calling to those who had the strength to answer. And yet, the unknown was never merely a physical challenge. It was a mirror to the soul, a test of courage, patience, and resolve. The deeper the sea, the more uncertain the sky, the greater the trial of spirit. To leave the familiar behind was to confront both the external world and the inner self, to face fears and doubts that could not be escaped on land. Every ripple in the water, every shadow in the clouds, every cry of a distant bird became a question of readiness. Were they prepared to meet what awaited them, to navigate not only the storms but the uncertainties that lay within? For those who felt the call most strongly, there was no hesitation. To remain at home was safe, yes, but safety was never the measure of greatness. Adventure, discovery, and the chance to touch the edge of the world required action, risk, and belief in what one could accomplish. As night fell, the fjords became quiet, save for the whisper of waves and the occasional call of a distant owl. Fires glowed softly in the villages, and the wind carried the scent of pine, salt, and the sea's eternal mystery. The stars above seemed particularly bright, each one a guide, a promise, or a reminder of the vastness that awaited. And in the hearts of those who dreamed of the horizon, a vision formed, longships slicing through silver waters, sails catching the wind, voyagers pressing forward toward what no map could define, toward the edge of the world where the known ended and everything else began. It was a place of danger, yes, but also of wonder, revelation, and the possibility of changing everything. The Vikings did not yet know what awaited them, but the sea itself seemed to acknowledge their longing, its waves rising and falling like the breath of a patient giant. Each journey would test their strength, their courage, and their imagination. Each night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the waves hummed their eternal song, those who listened closely could feel the subtle pull of destiny. The edge of the world was calling, not as a distant legend, but as a tangible future, waiting for those who dared to leave the comfort of home behind and embrace the unknown. And in that quiet, almost sacred anticipation, a story began, one that would ripple across generations, shaping history, inspiring awe, and reminding all who came after that curiosity and courage are the true measure of humanity. The lands the Vikings called home were harsh and demanding, a place where survival required constant effort and resilience. Rugged mountains rose sharply from fjords that cut deep into the earth, their peaks often hidden by clouds that drifted lazily in the sky, giving the impression that the heavens themselves were watching over the land. Thick forests, dark and mysterious, stretched for miles, holding secrets in their shadows and providing both sustenance and danger. In the winters, snow blanketed the valleys, turning familiar paths into treacherous mazes, and the winds howled as if carrying the voices of ancestors warning the living of the perils that awaited the unwary. Life was a constant negotiation with nature, and those who thrived were those who learned to read its signals, respect its power, and adapt with ingenuity. Despite its challenges, Scandinavia was a land of remarkable beauty, where every season brought a new palette of colors and moods. Spring revealed meadows awash with wildflowers, their delicate petals trembling in the cool breeze, and rivers that sparkled like ribbons of silver as the ice melted. Summer brought long, luminous days where the sun seemed reluctant to set, casting golden light across fields, fjords, and forests. Autumn cloaked the land in shades of amber, crimson, and ochre, and the scent of wood smoke from hearth fires mingled with the crispness of the wind. Even winter, with its harsh grip, had a solemn majesty, where frozen lakes reflected the pale sunlight, and the aurora borealis danced across the night sky, leaving the onlooker awestruck and contemplative. Within this formidable yet enchanting environment, communities developed tightly knit bonds. Villages were small, often built of timber and stone, clustered along rivers or sheltered by cliffs. Families relied upon each other not only for survival but for companionship, guidance, and the passing down of wisdom. Elders told stories beside the hearth, and their voices carried lessons that were as practical as they were profound: how to read the sky for approaching storms, how to track animals in the forest, and how to preserve food to survive the bitterest months. These tales also contained warnings of distant lands, of gods and spirits who could aid or hinder, and of adventures beyond the horizon, planting seeds of curiosity and courage in the minds of younger generations. Yet life in these communities was never easy, and the people had to navigate both natural and human challenges. Resources were finite, and the land, though beautiful, demanded respect and careful management. Hunting, fishing, farming, and craftsmanship were daily necessities, each task a delicate balance of skill, timing, and patience. At the same time, intervillage relations could be tense, with disputes over land, trade, or honor sometimes escalating into conflict. Within this context, stories of distant shores and hidden treasures were more than entertainment. They were a form of hope, a reminder that the world contained possibilities beyond immediate hardship, a promise that courage and effort could yield extraordinary rewards. For the Vikings, these pressures and limitations were never reasons to retreat, but rather catalysts for ambition. The harshness of home sharpened their skills and resolve, preparing them for the unknown. They learned to navigate rivers that twisted like serpents through dense forests, to read the winds and waves as a sailor reads a familiar book, and to endure discomfort as a constant companion rather than a complaint. Every hardship at home became a lesson in resilience, an unspoken training ground for exploration and discovery. The familiar struggles made the idea of venturing into uncharted territories seem not reckless but inevitable, a natural extension of a life lived at the edge of endurance. Religion and belief were woven deeply into everyday life, shaping both action and imagination. The gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and others, were not distant figures but active participants in the world, influencing weather, fate, and fortune. Rituals, offerings, and stories about divine deeds reinforced the idea that life itself was a journey filled with challenges that required wisdom, bravery, and sometimes cunning. When tales of distant lands reached a village, they were often framed in terms of the gods' influence. Was the sea welcoming or treacherous that day because of divine favor or displeasure? Could a new land hold blessings, or would it conceal dangers designed to test mortals' resolve? The interplay of belief, fear, and hope created a mindset in which adventure was not only possible but destined, a calling whispered to those with the ears to hear. The economic pressures of the time also pushed Vikings toward exploration. The homeland offered resources, yes, but not in abundance, and survival sometimes required ingenuity. Trade networks were developing, stretching across rivers, coasts, and even distant lands. Silver, furs, timber, and amber were valuable commodities, and the promise of acquiring more, or finding lands rich in resources yet untouched, fueled ambitions. The Vikings were aware that knowledge of new routes, fertile lands, and hidden treasures could elevate their communities and secure their families' futures. There was an unspoken urgency. Those who dared to seek out the unknown could gain advantage, while those who remained anchored to the familiar risked stagnation and scarcity. Children grew up absorbing both the rhythm of daily life and the allure of stories about the wide world. They watched their elders navigate the forests and seas, imitating their skills and absorbing subtle lessons in observation, patience, and courage. They heard sagas about heroes who had ventured far, faced monstrous beasts, and returned with glory, treasures, or new wisdom. These stories were often embroidered with myth, yet they planted a seed of possibility, a mental image of life beyond the fjords, beyond the forests, beyond the borders of known maps. The contrast between the safety of home and the call of adventure was ever present, creating a tension that shaped their imagination, their dreams, and ultimately, their choices. The lands the Vikings knew were both teacher and challenge, shaping character in ways subtle and profound. Every storm weathered, every river crossed, every animal hunted or tamed, taught lessons of adaptability, observation, and courage. The mountains, forests, and fjords became a canvas for skill and wisdom, a place where physical strength and mental acuity were equally valued. And yet, the same landscapes that demanded so much also whispered promises of more: distant lands, new peoples, and discoveries that could reshape everything the Vikings had ever known. The duality of the familiar and the unknown, the comfort of survival juxtaposed with the thrill of possibility, created a mindset uniquely suited for exploration. By the time a Viking set foot on a longship bound for distant shores, the lessons of home were ingrained, forming a foundation of endurance, ingenuity, and courage. Every hardship endured in their homeland was a preparation for what lay beyond. Every story told by the fire was a spark, igniting curiosity and determination. The longship was the heart of every Viking voyage, a vessel that embodied both ingenuity and aspiration, a bridge between the known and the unknown. Its sleek lines cut through the water with remarkable grace, as though it were an extension of the sea itself rather than a creation of human hands. Every plank of timber, every joint fastened with iron rivets, spoke of generations of experience and craft, honed through centuries of trial and error. The longship was more than a tool for transportation. It was a symbol of freedom, a means of connection between distant lands, and a vessel that carried the dreams of those who dared to leave home in search of what lay beyond the horizon. Crafted primarily from oak, the ships were light enough to be carried across land, yet sturdy enough to survive storms that would have shattered ordinary vessels. The keel, carefully curved, allowed the longship to glide smoothly over waves, responding to the slightest shift of wind and current. Its shallow draft enabled navigation through rivers, inlets, and coastal waters that would have been impassable to larger ships, opening paths that others could not traverse. These design features were not accidental. They reflected a deep understanding of the sea, honed by centuries of observation, experience, and adaptation. The longship was a testament to Viking intelligence and their ability to marry practicality with artistry. The bow and stern of the longship often rose high above the water, decorated with carved figures that could be dragons, serpents, or other mythological creatures. These embellishments were more than aesthetic. They were intended to protect, to intimidate, and to embody the spirit of the voyage itself. Sailors believed that the carvings could ward off evil spirits, guide the ship safely, or announce their presence to distant lands in a way that commanded respect. Each vessel carried its own personality, a combination of craftsmanship, symbolism, and purpose, reflecting the culture and beliefs of the people who built and sailed it. The ship was a living extension of the crew's courage, a partner in both triumph and adversity. The crew itself was carefully chosen and trained, a group whose rhythm and coordination could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Rowing in unison was both art and necessity, a movement that required strength, endurance, and trust. Each oar stroke became part of a larger harmony, echoing the heartbeat of the vessel and the pulse of the sea. Sailors learned to read subtle cues in the waves, to sense changes in wind and tide, and to anticipate the moods of the water as if it were a sentient companion. The ship was a reflection of human cooperation, skill, and adaptability, and every journey demanded complete synchronization of body, mind, and environment. The sails, usually made of woven wool, caught the wind like the wings of a bird, propelling the ship across vast distances with astonishing efficiency. Adjusting the sail required intuition as much as technique, a balance of patience and decisiveness. The wind was at once a partner and a challenge, capable of carrying the ship swiftly toward new horizons or throwing it into chaos with sudden storms. Each voyage required respect for this duality, an understanding that while the ship could carry them, the sea ultimately determined the terms of the journey. This dynamic relationship fostered a quiet reverence for nature and a sense of humility even amidst the thrill of exploration. The sensation of standing on the deck of a longship, feeling the subtle sway of the hull beneath one's feet, is difficult to convey fully, yet it shaped the very character of the Vikings who sailed them. The spray of salt water, the wind tearing at hair and clothing, and the endless horizon stretching in every direction created a profound sense of smallness and awe. Every voyage was a meditation on human limitations and potential, a test of courage, endurance, and resolve. It was on these ships that the Vikings confronted both the external challenges of the sea and the internal landscapes of fear, ambition, and wonder. The longship was not merely a means of travel, it was a vessel for transformation, carrying those aboard toward experiences that would redefine their understanding of the world. The design of the longship also allowed for incredible versatility. It could be launched from the sea to raid distant shores, transported overland to surprise enemies or access hidden rivers, and adapted for both warfare and trade. Its speed and maneuverability were legendary, often giving Vikings a strategic advantage over larger, slower vessels. Yet even with all its advantages, the longship required vigilance, knowledge, and skill. Each journey demanded careful preparation, the distribution of cargo and crew, the inspection of sails and hull, and the calculation of routes based on both geography and seasonal conditions. These tasks reinforced discipline, foresight, and a sense of responsibility among the crew, qualities essential for survival in unfamiliar and often hostile territories. Beyond the practical, the longship carried symbolic weight. It represented ambition, courage, and the promise of discovery. To climb aboard a ship ready for the open sea was to step into a world of possibility, leaving behind the security of the known for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The vessel itself became a narrative device, a stage for human drama, where bonds of camaraderie were forged, fears were confronted, and triumphs celebrated. In many ways, the longship was a storyteller, chronicling the journeys, successes, and failures of those who trusted it to carry them to the edge of the world. At night, when the sailors rested, the ship became a sanctuary and a lens through which to perceive the infinite. The gentle rocking lulled them into contemplation, the stars above mirrored the endless paths they might follow, and the sounds of the sea provided a constant, soothing rhythm. Every creak of the timbers and splash of waves reminded them of the delicate balance between human effort and natural forces. The longship was a teacher of patience, endurance, and humility, shaping not only the trajectory of their voyage but the very mindset of those aboard. It was here, amidst the interplay of wind, water, and wood, that the Vikings learned to navigate both the physical and emotional challenges of the unknown. Stories of these ships traveled back to the villages and fjords, inspiring awe and aspiration among those who had yet to embark on a journey. The longship became an icon of possibility, a tangible representation of the human drive to explore, to conquer, and to understand. It was celebrated in song and saga, immortalized in carvings and tales, and revered for the opportunities it made possible. Each vessel carried the weight of tradition and innovation, a testament to the union of craftsmanship, courage, and imagination. The longship was, in essence, a microcosm of the Viking spirit, elegant in design, resilient in adversity, and capable of bridging worlds. It transformed the vast, indifferent sea into a navigable expanse, turning the terrifying unknown into a canvas for human aspiration. The Vikings ventured into a world that was as much imagined as it was real, guided by tools, intuition, and stories passed down through generations. Maps, when they existed, were rudimentary, often sketched on animal skins or carved into wood, but their value lay less in precision and more in guidance, hinting at possibilities rather than dictating exact routes. Knowledge was carried in the mind as much as on parchment. Landmarks, river courses, the shifting of tides, the flight of birds, and the patterns of clouds all became part of a vast mental map that allowed sailors to navigate seas that seemed endless. The horizon was both a literal boundary and a canvas upon which imagination painted distant lands. Among the most fascinating and enigmatic tools of navigation was the sunstone, a crystal said to reveal the sun's location even when clouds obscured it. By rotating the stone and observing how light polarized within it, a skilled navigator could determine direction, maintaining course across vast, featureless waters. This practice was not merely technical, it required patience, intuition, and a deep understanding of the interplay between natural phenomena and human perception. The sunstone represented a merging of observation and wonder, a symbol of human ingenuity standing against the uncertainty of the unknown. Stars, too, were faithful guides. The night sky, clear and luminous, became a tapestry of instruction. Constellations were memorized and used to estimate latitude, a practice requiring calm attention and careful observation. The sailors learned to read the subtle differences in starlight, the timing of their rise and set, and the angles that hinted at direction. Every glance upward was a lesson in both geography and patience, a quiet ritual that connected the human observer to the vastness of the cosmos. The stars were companions on lonely nights, silent witnesses to courage, fear, and determination. Beyond tools, the Vikings relied on storytelling to navigate both the literal and figurative seas. Oral tradition preserved knowledge of dangerous waters, shifting currents, and hidden reefs, encoded within sagas that combined fact and myth. Tales of sea serpents, whirlpools, and phantom lands were more than entertainment. They served as mnemonic devices, guiding sailors through perils while instilling caution and respect. Every story, carefully retold, carried subtle lessons in geography, weather patterns, and human behavior, blending imagination with practical knowledge. To navigate successfully was to understand both the world as it was and the world as it might be imagined. The ocean itself demanded constant attention. Its moods were unpredictable, capable of transforming from calm serenity to violent fury in moments. Observing waves, wind, and the behavior of birds or fish became second nature. An experienced sailor could sense a storm approaching long before it arrived, interpreting subtle changes in the water's texture, the scent of the air, and the movement of clouds. The sea communicated in signs that only those attuned to it could perceive. Reading these signs required not only skill but also mindfulness and patience, qualities that were cultivated through both practice and reverence. Yet navigation was not purely mechanical or intellectual, it was deeply psychological. The unknown created both excitement and fear, and sailors had to master their emotions as much as their instruments. The vastness of the sea could induce a sense of vertigo, a feeling of being lost in infinity, where familiar landmarks disappeared and the horizon seemed unending. Courage became a discipline, honed through experience and reinforced by communal effort. Crew members depended on one another, relying on shared knowledge, mutual trust, and coordinated action. In this way, navigation was both an individual and collective skill, intertwining human resilience with environmental observation. Stories of lands beyond the horizon were both inspiration and instruction. Tales told by skalds and elders described cliffs that rose like walls, rivers that glowed with strange colors, and forests inhabited by creatures that were half real, half imagined. These narratives carried warnings as well as promise, teaching the importance of caution, respect, and flexibility. A sailor who approached the unknown with arrogance or ignorance was unlikely to survive, while those who combined bravery with attentiveness found not only safety but also opportunity. Myth and reality were intertwined, creating a cognitive map that guided both imagination and action. The interplay between technology and intuition became particularly evident when storms arose. The sunstone could be useless beneath a thundercloud, and stars hidden behind darkness, leaving sailors to rely entirely on memory, experience, and instinct. The ship became an extension of perception, responding to subtle shifts in waves and wind, guided by hands that had internalized years of knowledge. In these moments, navigation became a deeply embodied practice, a dance between human skill and natural forces. Every decision carried weight, every observation mattered, and the stakes were high. A single miscalculation could lead to disaster. Yet even in danger, there was wonder. The ocean was a living entity, filled with creatures, colors, and phenomena that inspired awe. Bioluminescent waves shimmered under moonlight, whales breached with majestic power, and the aurora borealis danced across polar skies, creating moments of quiet, surreal beauty. These experiences were recorded mentally and orally, forming a library of sensory impressions that guided future voyages. Each sighting, each subtle shift in the environment, became a story, a lesson, and a guide, reinforcing the notion that understanding the unknown required both observation and imagination. The Vikings' approach to navigation reflected a balance between structure and freedom, between measured knowledge and daring exploration. Mental maps were complemented by sensory experience, oral tradition, and intuition. Their voyages were not aimless drifting but deliberate acts of engagement with a world that demanded respect, patience, and curiosity. Every journey was a negotiation with uncertainty, a dialogue between human ingenuity and the vastness of the natural world. To navigate successfully was to cultivate awareness, adaptability, and a sense of wonder, all while maintaining the focus and discipline required for survival. This blend of myth, observation, and technical skill exemplified the Vikings' ability to approach the unknown with both humility and courage. They understood that the world was larger than their immediate surroundings, and they approached it with a combination of reverence, ingenuity, and curiosity. Each voyage beyond familiar shores was a lesson in perception, psychology, and strategy, a practice that demanded attention to detail as well as openness to possibility. The edge of the world was not simply a physical location. It was a conceptual frontier, a space where human imagination and skill intersected with nature's infinite complexity. In quiet moments, As the longship cut silently through calm waters under starlit skies, the sailors felt the profound connection between their craft, their stories, and the vast unknown. They were both observers and participants, recording lessons in memory and legend, attuning themselves to signs that might save or guide them. The horizon was not a limit but an invitation, a challenge to expand understanding, to encounter the unexpected, and to redefine what was possible. The moment of departure was a mixture of exhilaration and tension, a threshold that separated the comfort of home from the uncertainty of the open sea. Villages faded behind them as longships glided over calm waters, their oars dipping rhythmically into the waves, each stroke a step further into the unknown. The wind carried both the scent of pine from the fjords and the briny tang of the sea, a reminder that the familiar was receding and the extraordinary lay ahead. The horizon stretched endlessly, a subtle line that teased the imagination and ignited curiosity, as if the world itself were challenging the sailors to see how far they could go. The initial hours of a voyage carried a deceptive calm. The waves, gentle and inviting, lulled the sailors into a rhythm that felt almost meditative, the sun reflecting on the water in sparkling patterns that mesmerized the eyes. Yet beneath this serenity lay an awareness that the sea was never truly still, that danger could arrive suddenly, without warning, and that each mile traveled carried risk and possibility in equal measure. This duality, tranquility and threat, beauty and peril, created a heightened state of presence, where every sound, shift in the wind, and subtle change in current demanded attention. The journey was not merely physical, it was a test of awareness, courage, and adaptability. As the hours turned into days, the sailors' senses became attuned to the subtle language of the ocean. Waves spoke in rhythms, the wind whispered directions, and birds circling above hinted at the presence of land. Each observation was both practical and poetic, a lesson in the interplay between environment and human perception. Navigators noted the color of the water, the temperature of the air, and the patterns of clouds, interpreting them as signs of weather, currents, or nearby shores. Knowledge became instinct, and instinct became trust, in themselves, in each other, and in the ship that carried them forward. Storms were inevitable, and when they arrived, the calm of the sea transformed into raw, elemental power. Waves towered like moving mountains, their crests frothing and curling with menace, and winds howled with a voice that seemed almost alive. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the expanse of ocean in stark, fleeting brilliance, while thunder rolled like the growl of some distant beast. In these moments, the longship, nimble and resilient, became both refuge and test. Each decision mattered: how to angle the sail, when to row in unison, when to trust the currents, and the crew's coordination determined survival. Fear was present, but so was focus. The storm demanded every ounce of attention, every measure of skill. The psychological aspect of such a voyage was profound. Isolation stretched beyond the physical to the mental, as endless waters reflected the vastness of possibility and the smallness of human endeavor. Sailors confronted their own fears, doubts, and uncertainties, learning to master emotions that might otherwise undermine judgment. Each day, each night, offered lessons in resilience, patience in the face of monotony, courage in the presence of danger, and hope in the midst of uncertainty. These were journeys not only across the sea but into the depths of human experience, where every challenge sharpened the mind and strengthened the spirit. Food and sustenance were constant concerns, shaping both routine and mood. Dried fish, salted meat, and hard bread became staples, supplemented by the occasional catch from nets cast into the water. Fresh water, carefully rationed, was as precious as gold, and sailors learned to recognize natural indicators of safe drinking sources or rain collection. Meals were simple but vital, moments of shared respite and reflection. These modest provisions contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the surrounding seascape, highlighting the tension between human fragility and the power of nature. Each day of sustenance became a quiet triumph, a testament to planning, discipline, and cooperation. The emotional texture of the voyage was layered with awe, anticipation, and camaraderie. Conversations often meandered into stories of gods, heroes, and legendary explorers, their words weaving a tapestry that connected the past to the present. Laughter punctuated tension, songs carried across the waves, and moments of silence allowed for reflection on the enormity of the journey. Each sailor was both participant and witness, experiencing danger and beauty with acute awareness. The shared rhythm of rowing, the adjustments of the sail, the observation of the stars, all fostered a profound sense of unity, a realization that survival and success depended on mutual trust and collective skill. As days merged into nights, the horizon remained a tantalizing mystery. Occasionally, shapes emerged, distant birds, unusual cloud formations, or the subtle dark line of land barely visible. Each hint of possibility sparked discussion, speculation, and excitement, yet the uncertainty remained. The sailors learned patience, recognizing that discovery was measured not in hours but in the slow accumulation of clues, observations, and calculated risk. They were explorers not only of geography but of perception, learning to read the environment with both care and imagination, interpreting signs that might guide them safely toward their goal. Sleep on the longship was intermittent and light, a cycle punctuated by the motion of waves and the needs of the crew. Yet in those brief moments of rest, the mind continued to process the world around it, the distant glow of bioluminescent water, the subtle changes in wind, and the faint silhouette of cloud or land. Dreams intertwined with reality, creating a mental map enriched by both experience and imagination. Even in exhaustion, sailors remained attuned to the sea, their subconscious constantly parsing information, anticipating danger, and planning for what lay ahead. This blending of conscious and unconscious awareness became a hallmark of successful voyaging. The first sightings of truly foreign waters, of currents and coastlines unlike those of home, were moments of both triumph and trepidation. The unfamiliar presented a challenge to both skill and expectation, forcing adaptation and careful observation. Each new element, the texture of the sand beneath shallow water, the shapes of cliffs, or the flight of birds, was catalogued mentally, providing clues for navigation and survival. The contrast between known and unknown created heightened sensitivity, a sense that every detail mattered, that every observation could be the key to success or the difference between life and disaster. Throughout the voyage, the Vikings maintained a delicate balance between hope and caution. Excitement for discovery coexisted with respect for danger, curiosity intertwined with vigilance. The edge of the known world was not a single point but a continuum of experiences, each step forward a negotiation with both the environment and the human mind. With each passing day, the distance from home grew, the horizon expanded, and the sense of being on the verge of something monumental intensified. As the Vikings pressed further into unknown waters, the rhythm of the journey became both a comfort and a guide. Days blended seamlessly into nights, each marked by the ebb and flow of waves, the shifting of wind, and the quiet resilience of the sailors. The longship became an extension of the crew, responding to subtle changes in the environment as if alive, a partner in both challenge and triumph. Every ripple in the water, every gust of wind, demanded attention, reinforcing the delicate balance between human skill and the vast, unpredictable power of nature. The sea, in all its immensity, was at once adversary and teacher, offering lessons in patience, observation, and humility. The farther they ventured, the more the familiar gave way to the extraordinary. Colors shifted subtly, the light reflecting differently on the water, and the air carried scents unlike those of home, salty yet tinged with something earthy, a sign that new lands were near. The horizon remained a constant presence, a line that teased the imagination and invited speculation. Sailors would point to distant shadows, questioning whether they were clouds, birds, or the first glimpses of land, each observation sparking anticipation and careful discussion. The unknown became a canvas for imagination, yet it was also a reality to be understood, studied, and respected, a duality that required both curiosity and caution. The sea tested them in ways that went beyond physical endurance. Isolation stretched the mind, creating a space where thoughts could wander freely, yet where fear and doubt could also take root. Sailors grappled with their own inner landscapes, confronting insecurities, memories, and hopes, all amplified by the vast emptiness around them. In these moments, Camaraderie became essential, not just for survival but for maintaining morale. Shared stories, songs, and quiet conversation reinforced bonds, creating a collective resilience that allowed the crew to navigate not only the physical challenges of the journey but also the emotional complexities that accompanied it. Storms, when they arrived, were dramatic and unforgiving. Dark clouds swallowed the horizon, waves towered like mountains, and winds roared with relentless intensity. Lightning cleaved the sky, revealing the staggering scale of the ocean in stark, fleeting clarity. Yet within the chaos, the sailors found rhythm and coordination, each movement precise, each decision critical. They adjusted sails, synchronized oars, and relied on collective knowledge, turning fear into focus and challenge into action. The storm became both test and teacher, reinforcing lessons in patience, adaptability, and courage, a reminder that the sea demanded respect as much as it offered possibility. The experience of navigating these waters reshaped perception. Familiar landmarks disappeared, replaced by subtle cues in wave patterns, wind direction, and the behavior of wildlife. Birds flying overhead, fish breaking the surface, or the scent of vegetation carried by the breeze became invaluable indicators, guiding navigation in ways that instruments alone could not. Sailors learned to trust both their senses and their accumulated knowledge, blending observation, intuition, and experience into a skill set that was both technical and deeply human. The edge of the world demanded not just strength but attentiveness, an ability to perceive details invisible to the untrained eye. Each sighting of land, however fleeting, brought a surge of excitement tempered by caution. Rocks jutting from the sea, faint silhouettes of trees, or unusual currents hinted at shores waiting to be explored. These first glimpses were moments of both hope and uncertainty, requiring careful assessment before committing to approach. Sailors measured angles, observed patterns, and discussed strategies, blending curiosity with prudence. Every new piece of information added to the mental map of the unknown, slowly transforming speculation into knowledge and guiding the crew toward safe passage. The psychological resilience developed on these journeys was extraordinary. Endless horizons and unpredictable conditions could have undermined morale, yet the sailors cultivated focus, patience, and adaptability. They learned to endure discomfort, to regulate fear, and to maintain clarity of thought despite the relentless demands of the sea. Moments of stillness, when the waves lulled the ship and the wind softened, allowed reflection and consolidation of experience. Sailors used these periods to observe, to discuss, and to plan, reinforcing the interplay between perception, imagination, and strategic thinking. The journey itself became a teacher, shaping character as much as it shaped geographical knowledge. The interaction between crew and vessel reached a near symbiotic level. Every creak of the timbers, every sway of the hull, was interpreted and responded to with skill and attentiveness. The longship, built with centuries of accumulated knowledge, required not just technical operation but a kind of intuitive understanding. Sailors moved in concert with the ship, responding to subtle cues in ways that were almost unconscious yet precise. This intimacy with the vessel reinforced confidence, a sense of agency amidst the unpredictability of the open sea, and a profound respect for both craftsmanship and the natural world. As the Vikings approached truly unknown territories, the contrast between expectation and reality became palpable. Stories from home, maps, and Skald's tales had shaped a mental image of distant lands, yet the first encounters were often both surprising and humbling. Shores were not always as described, flora and fauna unfamiliar, and the climate sometimes harsher or milder than imagined. These encounters demanded flexibility, critical observation, and rapid adaptation, reinforcing the notion that the edge of the world was not static but dynamic, constantly reshaped by perception and experience. The journey was as much a cognitive challenge as a physical one, a test of imagination, reasoning, and resilience. Preparation and attention to detail were critical. Every ration of food, every repair to the ship, and every adjustment of sail or rudder had to be calculated with foresight. Small mistakes could have consequences magnified by distance and isolation. Yet the sailors approached these tasks with a sense of ritual and mindfulness, transforming routine labor into acts of meditation and mastery. Each chore became a thread in the fabric of survival, connecting the crew, the ship, and the sea in a continuous cycle of observation, response, and adaptation. The mundane was elevated to the extraordinary, imbuing every movement with significance. Even in moments of calm, the unknown remained a presence, shaping behavior and thought. The horizon, always just out of reach, invited speculation, wonder, and cautious optimism. Each day brought new observations, subtle changes in currents, shifts in weather, or glimpses of wildlife, all contributing to the evolving mental map of the world beyond home. The process of navigating toward these territories became an ongoing dialogue between perception and imagination, strategy and curiosity, fear and courage. The monastery had grown to feel less like a building and more like a living organism, its rhythms intertwined with the lives of the monks and the natural world around it. The young monk, now increasingly attuned to these rhythms, began to perceive patterns that were invisible to most. He noticed how the timing of light through the high windows could indicate the change of seasons, how the wind carried subtle signals from the valley below, and how the faintest shifts in a fellow monk's posture or expression could reveal inner turbulence. Life, he realized, was a language written in small details, a code that could be read by those who practiced careful observation, patience, and reflection. Meditation deepened his capacity to perceive these subtle currents. Hours spent in silent contemplation, seated on the cold stone floor or beneath ancient trees in the monastery gardens, became a canvas for expanding awareness. The young monk discovered that by observing without attachment, by noticing thoughts, sensations, and the flow of energy within and around him, he could discern patterns that extended far beyond the immediate moment. The ordinary became extraordinary, the flicker of a candle, the rustle of a leaf, the cadence of a chant. All spoke a language that could be interpreted by a mind attuned to subtlety. These lessons were not theoretical, they were living experiences, shaping his understanding of life, causality, and the threads that link past, present, and future. He began to develop a profound sense of timing, an intuition for the flow of events that would later form the basis of his predictive abilities. Small instances served as practice, anticipating the arrival of a visitor, sensing the weather changes before they occurred, or knowing the emotional state of someone before they spoke. At first, these were modest observations, easily explained as coincidence. But with time, repetition, and reflection, he recognized an underlying order, a predictable rhythm in the apparent chaos of life. This understanding, he realized, was not merely intellectual. It was experiential, a kind of living knowledge rooted in the intimate observation of the natural and human worlds. Study of ancient texts complemented these observations. Scrolls and manuscripts on philosophy, mysticism, and ethics provided a framework for interpreting the patterns he perceived. The young monk found parallels between the teachings of sages and the insights revealed through careful observation of life. The abstract became concrete. Lessons on impermanence resonated with the cycles of nature he witnessed daily, and principles of compassion found reflection in the subtle interplay of human interactions around him. By synthesizing these sources, he cultivated a holistic understanding that integrated mind, heart, and observation, a synthesis that would later allow him to navigate the mysteries of mortality with clarity and calm. The young monk's internal discipline became a quiet source of influence within the monastery. Senior monks noted his ability to respond to situations with insight and balance, offering counsel when needed without force or assertion. Younger novices sought his guidance, sensing a depth that transcended ordinary experience. Despite this recognition, he remained humble, understanding that true wisdom requires restraint, patience, and a continual willingness to learn. His presence became a stabilizing force, an anchor for those around him, as he moved through the monastery with a grace and serenity that drew attention not through spectacle but through quiet authority. As his awareness expanded, he began to perceive the interplay of cause and effect with increasing precision. He noticed how small decisions could ripple outward, influencing outcomes in ways not immediately apparent. A gentle word, a moment of patience, a careful choice in action, these could alter trajectories far beyond the individual, shaping events in subtle but significant ways. Conversely, impatience, negligence, or unawareness could create disturbances that echoed through relationships and circumstances. The young monk's growing insight into these dynamics was not abstract theorizing. It was grounded in lived experience, meditation, and disciplined reflection, forming the foundation for the extraordinary predictions he would later make. Travelers and pilgrims who visited the monastery contributed to the monk's understanding of the broader world. He observed how individuals from distant villages carried customs, fears, and desires that reflected the universality of human experience, as well as the uniqueness of circumstance. He noticed patterns in behavior, the influence of environment on decision-making, and the subtle interplay of intention and outcome. These observations reinforce the principle that life's apparent randomness masks a deeper order, accessible to those who cultivate attentive observation, reflection, and ethical awareness. The young monk's inner life became increasingly rich, layered with contemplation, intuition, and insight. Meditation, prayer, and study were complemented by careful observation of the world around him. He began to perceive connections that eluded others. The arrival on new shores was a profound shift for the Vikings, a transition from the fluidity of the sea to the tangible presence of land. Each step taken across the unfamiliar soil brought with it new textures, sounds, and scents. The sand, smooth yet uneven, shifted beneath their feet in a way that was at once grounding and unfamiliar. Pebbles clinked softly under boots and bare feet, the subtle noises reminding the sailors that every movement mattered. The air carried a mixture of salt, earth, and greenery, a fragrant combination that suggested both fertility and mystery. Every breath taken was a reminder that this world was alive, full of possibilities and hidden dangers alike. The first explorations required meticulous attention. Crews would fan out slowly, surveying terrain, noting the density of forests, the presence of freshwater streams, and the shapes of hills and cliffs. Every observation was catalogued mentally, forming an evolving map that could guide further movements. The contrast with the vast openness of the sea was striking. On land, space was defined, limited, yet filled with complexity. Each grove of trees or undulating hill became both a marker and a challenge, a puzzle that demanded understanding, respect, and cautious curiosity. The edge of the known world now existed in 3 dimensions, requiring vigilance, discernment, and adaptability. The environment was rich in signs of life. Birds with unfamiliar calls darted between branches, insects buzzed through the undergrowth, and the subtle rustle of larger creatures suggested the presence of mammals, either predator or prey. Observing these animals became both a matter of strategy and wonder. Birds flying inland suggested fresh water or safe landing areas, while signs of larger animals indicated hunting possibilities but also potential threats. The Vikings relied on centuries of observational knowledge, combining instinct with inherited wisdom to navigate this new ecosystem. Every sound, movement, or scent was a clue, contributing to a complex understanding of the land's character. Plant life offered both sustenance and learning. Trees with distinctive bark, leaves, and fruit were studied carefully, as were grasses, shrubs, and flowering plants. Some were edible, providing nutrition for the travelers. Others could be used for shelter, fire, or tools. The need to understand the environment fostered a deep sense of observation, patience, and experimentation. The Vikings approached these discoveries systematically, testing cautiously, noting differences, and sharing findings with their companions. Every interaction with the flora was simultaneously practical and educational, blending survival with curiosity and respect. Settling temporarily on unfamiliar land required more than physical presence. It required strategy. Shelter had to be constructed in locations that provided both safety and resources, often close to water yet protected from wind and potential predators. Fires were built carefully, balancing warmth, cooking needs, and the need to remain unobtrusive. Tents, tarps, and makeshift structures provided temporary refuge, yet the environment itself offered clues about where and how to establish these spaces. Observation, attention to detail, and planning became essential, reinforcing the Vikings' ability to adapt to the unknown with both skill and foresight. the psychological impact of landfall was significant. For weeks, the crew had been immersed in the endless horizon of the sea, dependent on rhythm, observation, and coordination. The land, in contrast, offered complexity and depth. It demanded new skills, spatial reasoning, ecological understanding, and careful management of resources. The transition from one environment to another challenged perceptions, forcing the Vikings to integrate experience from the sea with the novel demands of terrain. This cognitive flexibility became essential, highlighting the interplay between preparation, adaptation, and curiosity. The edge of the world was not merely a geographic point, it was a mental frontier as well. Interaction with the environment also carried an emotional resonance. Each discovery, the glint of a freshwater stream, the delicate scent of a flowering plant, the sudden flash of a bird in flight, evoked wonder. Simultaneously, awareness of risk remained present. Hidden rocks, uneven ground, and the possibility of predatory animals created a constant undercurrent of vigilance. These dualities, beauty and danger, familiarity and strangeness, heightened perception, deepened engagement, and strengthened the crew's connection with the land. The edge of the world was now a living, breathing entity, demanding both admiration and respect. Observation extended to the water as well. Coastal tides, waves, and currents provided insight into safe anchorage and potential hazards. Subtle changes in water color indicated sandbanks, rocks, or depth variations, while patterns in ripples suggested underwater obstacles. The Vikings had learned to read these signs at sea, but on land, observation became more nuanced, incorporating sound, smell, and tactile feedback from the shoreline. The interaction between land and water was a continuous lesson in the interconnectedness of natural forces, reinforcing the Vikings' understanding that mastery of the environment required integrated attention to multiple cues. Exploration revealed both challenges and resources. Rocky terrain offered materials for tools and construction, while sandy soils suggested fertile areas for potential cultivation or temporary sustenance. The environment itself dictated patterns of movement, requiring adaptation and careful planning. Paths were chosen based on ease of travel, availability of fresh water, and shelter from elements, blending instinct with observation. Each decision reinforced skills of strategy, foresight, and responsiveness to dynamic conditions. Landfall was not simply arrival, it was an immersive process of negotiation with an environment that was both generous and demanding. The first nights on land deepened sensory perception. Campfires crackled softly, the scent of smoke mingling with vegetation, while stars above provided continuity with the celestial guidance relied upon at sea. Sounds of nocturnal animals punctuated silence, reinforcing awareness of surroundings. Sleep was both restorative and vigilant, an interplay between relaxation and subtle alertness. The contrast with ocean-bound sleep, motionless but surrounded by water, was profound, illustrating the shift from one domain to another while maintaining continuity in observation and adaptation. The edge of the world demanded both physical presence and cognitive engagement, creating a holistic experience that shaped perception, decision-making, and emotional resilience. Interactions among the crew took on new dimensions. Shared observation, collective decision-making, and the exchange of insights about land features reinforced teamwork. Discussions about potential resources, hazards, and paths forward strengthened bonds and enhanced the collective understanding of the environment. The transition from sea to land required recalibration of roles and responsibilities, and each member's expertise became more visible and critical. The days following the initial landfall were a delicate balance between exploration and consolidation. The Vikings moved deliberately, learning to interpret the terrain, noting changes in vegetation, the contours of hills, and the presence of water sources. Every stream, grove, or rocky outcrop became a point of reference, helping them understand the environment and build a mental map that extended beyond immediate observation. Walking across new soil required attention to detail. Subtle shifts in elevation could conceal hidden pools or jagged stones, while the movement of plants or insects hinted at resources or potential threats. Each step was measured, each glance deliberate, combining curiosity with prudence. The air was filled with unfamiliar scents and sounds, which heightened both awareness and imagination. Birds sang in melodies unfamiliar yet melodious, rustling in trees that were alien in form yet beautiful in their variation. Insects buzzed along undergrowth and meadows, sometimes brightly colored, sometimes nearly invisible, offering subtle clues about the health and diversity of the ecosystem. The ground was alive with small movements, scurrying mammals, the glimmer of scales from fish in streams, or the flicker of shadows from larger creatures. Every observation contributed to understanding the balance of life on the land, and with each detail, the Vikings refined their ability to predict, respond, and interact effectively with the environment. Food and sustenance remained central concerns. Edible plants were tested carefully, guided by experience and knowledge inherited from home, while foraging near freshwater sources required caution and attentiveness. Streams were inspected for clarity, flow, and the presence of fish, while foraging paths were noted for future reference. Gathering required both strategy and patience, an awareness of what was immediately necessary and what might be needed in the days ahead. The land, generous and complex, offered nourishment but also demanded respect and caution, reinforcing the Vikings' dual approach of curiosity tempered by prudence. Water, critical for survival, was scrutinized with care. Freshwater streams were tested for taste, clarity, and flow, providing immediate sustenance while signaling potential landing areas for larger exploration. Observation extended to tidal behavior and wave patterns near shorelines, as these subtle cues often suggested the contours of the underwater terrain. The Vikings combined sensory input with prior knowledge, interpreting minute differences in color, sound, and temperature to make informed decisions about where to drink, camp, or navigate. The skill of reading water was a continuation of their sea-bound expertise, now applied with nuanced precision to a terrestrial environment. Exploration of the landscape revealed both practical resources and signs of mystery. Trees provided timber for repair, shelter, and tools, while rocks could be shaped into implements or markers for navigation. Unfamiliar plant species were cataloged, some potentially useful, others dangerous, requiring careful identification. The ecosystem seemed layered and intricate, each element connected to the others in subtle ways. Observing how animals moved, where water pooled, and how plants grew offered insights into seasonal patterns, feeding habits, and environmental hazards. Every discovery contributed to a cumulative understanding that would serve not only the current crew but generations to come. The psychological dimension of the landfall was profound. Moving from the endless expanse of the ocean to defined spaces of terrain introduced new challenges for perception, planning, and adaptation. The crew's mental map expanded rapidly, integrating sensory experiences with inherited knowledge and creative inference. Each observation reinforced confidence, while each unexpected element demanded flexibility and problem-solving. The edge of the world became a layered concept, encompassing both physical space and the cognitive effort required to navigate, understand, and thrive within it. Success depended as much on mental acuity and emotional resilience as on physical skill. Nighttime brought new subtleties to exploration. Campfires flickered against the darkness, their glow illuminating small areas while leaving much of the landscape shrouded in shadow. Sounds shifted, nocturnal animals stirred, wind whispered through trees, and water lapped gently against shores or rocky edges. Sleep was light and interrupted by alertness, each sound prompting evaluation. Yet this heightened awareness coexisted with moments of quiet reflection, allowing the crew to integrate observations from the day. The darkness itself became an instructive teacher, revealing patterns, contrasts, and nuances invisible in daylight. Interactions among the crew continued to play a central role in adaptation. Shared observations, discussions about potential hazards, and coordination of tasks reinforced both social cohesion and practical efficiency. Each member's expertise contributed to collective knowledge, whether in recognizing edible plants, assessing water safety, or interpreting signs of wildlife. Mutual trust and attention ensured that decisions were informed and responsive to immediate realities. Exploration was thus a social as well as a cognitive endeavor, where survival and discovery relied on communication, observation, and collaboration. The interplay between imagination and reality remained constant. Stories of distant lands from home informed expectations and influenced perceptions, yet first-hand observation often challenged or refined these narratives. Trees, rivers, and animals were experienced directly, revealing subtleties that oral tradition could only hint at. Sailors found themselves mapping the unknown both mentally and emotionally, negotiating between inherited tales and lived experience. The result was a deeper, richer understanding, where myth and reality coexisted, shaping both perception and interpretation of the environment. The land offered both immediate lessons and longer-term insights. Patterns in plant growth indicated seasonal cycles and soil quality, while animal behavior suggested potential hunting strategies or areas to avoid. Rocks and terrain features guided the construction of shelters, pathways, and observation points. Freshwater sources influenced campsite selection, while wind direction and elevation informed exposure to weather. Each decision relied on careful synthesis of sensory input, prior knowledge, and adaptive reasoning. Exploration became a continuous process of evaluation and recalibration, with the land itself as both instructor and challenge. As the days progressed, a rhythm emerged. Exploration, observation, and consolidation alternated with periods of rest and reflection. Crew members adapted to new environmental cues, refining their skills in foraging, navigation, and survival. Confidence grew alongside awareness of risk, creating a delicate balance between boldness and caution. The edge of the world became increasingly defined, not as a line or a point, but as a continuum of space, experience, and discovery, each segment unfolding as the Vikings moved deeper into unfamiliar terrain. Every encounter, from minor observations to significant discoveries, reinforced the importance of attentiveness and patience. Soil types, vegetation patterns, and the behavior of animals all conveyed subtle messages about resources and potential hazards. The following days on the distant shores unfolded as a careful balance of observation, adaptation, and quiet exploration. Every morning brought a new light to the landscape, revealing textures, colors, and details previously unseen. Dew glistened on the grass and leaves, reflecting sunlight in delicate, shifting patterns that changed with each passing hour. The gentle rustle of foliage in the wind, the distant call of birds, and the occasional splash of fish in shallow streams created a symphony of subtle sounds that both guided and grounded the Vikings. Every sensory input became an essential piece of information, shaping perception and influencing decisions about movement, foraging, and the establishment of temporary camps. Walking through unfamiliar terrain required a heightened sense of attentiveness. Pebbles and uneven ground demanded careful placement of each foot, while slopes and hidden dips could conceal streams, rocks, or other features that required navigation with skill. The air carried scents that signaled both opportunity and caution. The earthy fragrance of wet soil suggested fertile areas for plants, while the sharp tang of certain herbs or distant smoke hinted at either potential sustenance or unknown danger. Every breath, every glance, every sound contributed to the evolving understanding of the land. The Vikings moved with deliberate calm, balancing curiosity with caution, and learning to read the environment as both guide and teacher. Foraging and food collection became exercises in careful observation and cautious experimentation. Leaves, fruits, and roots were examined, touched, and, when deemed safe, tasted with meticulous attention. Streams were checked for clarity, flow, and signs of fish, while edges of forests or meadows were assessed for edible plants or small game. Each interaction required patience and discernment, combining inherited knowledge with instinct and direct experience. The land provided sustenance, but it demanded respect and mindfulness. Every discovery, however small, reinforced the Vikings' ability to survive, adapt, and thrive in unfamiliar territory. The psychology of exploration was as critical as the physical challenges. The mind, sharpened by weeks of open sea, now confronted a new set of variables: terrain, flora, fauna, and potential hazards. Each step demanded observation, interpretation, and reflection. The crew developed routines that incorporated both attentiveness and relaxation, balancing vigilance with moments of quiet rest. Shadows, patterns, and distant movements were constantly scanned and interpreted, Yet the Vikings also allowed themselves to appreciate the beauty and novelty of their surroundings. This dual awareness, practical and aesthetic, enhanced perception, sustained morale, and reinforced the cognitive flexibility necessary for continued discovery. Navigating the interplay of land and water became a central task. Streams, ponds, and small lakes were sources of sustenance but also potential hazards. Subtle differences in water color, flow patterns, or the movement of aquatic creatures provided critical information. The Vikings had learned to read water at sea, and these skills were now applied with refined precision to terrestrial environments. Understanding how land and water interacted, observing tidal effects on coastal features, and noting seasonal or environmental patterns became essential elements of both survival and exploration. Water was both resource and guide, shaping movement, decision-making, and perception of the broader landscape. The crew also became increasingly aware of signs of animal activity. Tracks in the soil indicated movement patterns and potential feeding areas, while sounds of birds, insects, and mammals revealed the rhythms of life in the new territory. Some encounters were fleeting, a glimpse of a fox darting through undergrowth, a sudden splash in a stream, but each observation contributed to a growing mental map of the environment. Understanding these signs allowed the Vikings to anticipate conditions, locate resources, and avoid hazards. The edge of the world was alive with information, demanding attentiveness, interpretation, and respect. Building temporary shelters was both a practical necessity and an exercise in adaptation. The Vikings used local materials, timber, leaves, stones, and clay, to create spaces that offered protection from the elements. Sites were chosen carefully, often near water but shielded from wind and potential predators. Construction required skill, planning, and teamwork, transforming raw materials into functional, safe, and sometimes even comfortable shelters. The process reinforced cohesion among the crew and provided a tangible sense of accomplishment, transforming the unfamiliar land into a space of both safety and discovery. The contrast between the sea and land became increasingly apparent. The ocean had demanded constant vigilance and rhythm, while the land introduced complexity, stability, and variability. Moving across solid ground required attention to both immediate and distant features, integrating knowledge of topography, resources, and potential threats. The Vikings learned to navigate in 3 dimensions, observing subtle cues in vegetation, slope, and water patterns. Each day became a careful dance of observation, testing, and adaptation, blending inherited knowledge with new experience to create a sophisticated understanding of the territory. Interaction with the environment was not purely practical, it carried an emotional resonance as well. The sight of flowing streams, the smell of fertile soil, and the sound of wildlife created a profound sense of connection to the land. At the same time, awareness of potential dangers maintained a quiet vigilance. This duality, wonder and caution, heightened perception, deepened engagement, and reinforced respect for the complexity of the world beyond home. The edge of the known world was both a space to be explored and a teacher demanding humility, observation, and care. The Vikings' collective experience on land strengthened social bonds. Shared discoveries, joint decision-making, and collaborative problem-solving reinforced cohesion, trust, and communication. Crew members relied on each other's skills, knowledge, and insights to navigate unfamiliar terrain, test food, identify water sources, and construct shelters. The social dynamics became integral to both survival and the process of discovery. Mutual observation, discussion, and reflection enhanced not only practical effectiveness but also cognitive and emotional resilience, creating a group capable of navigating uncertainty with confidence and cooperation. As exploration continued, the Vikings refined their ability to integrate observation, reflection, and action. Every detail, soil color, plant type, animal movement, water flow, was noted and interpreted. Patterns emerged, revealing both resources and risks, guiding the next steps of exploration and settlement. The land provided continuous feedback, teaching lessons about adaptability, foresight, and the interconnectedness of natural systems. Observation became an almost meditative practice, where attention to detail, patience, and reflection allowed the crew to navigate uncertainty with both skill and composure. Over time, small patterns and routines became established. This practice of subtle leadership reinforced his own development, teaching him that influence is most profound when it respects the autonomy of others while guiding the natural flow of events. Through these interactions, he continued to refine both his insight and his ethical understanding, preparing him for the more profound predictions and responsibilities that lay ahead. He also deepened his connection with the natural world, recognizing that patterns in life extend beyond human behavior to the rhythms of earth, water, air, and sky. He observed the tides, seasonal shifts, and the behavior of animals, integrating these patterns with his understanding of human action and intention. This holistic awareness enhanced his ability to perceive subtle causal relationships and anticipate outcomes in both immediate and extended contexts. The natural world became both a teacher and a mirror, reflecting the intricate order underlying all existence. As his understanding matured, the young monk developed a remarkable balance between inner stillness and external attentiveness. He moved through the monastery and surrounding villages with a quiet grace, aware of the smallest cues yet never losing presence in the moment. This balance allowed him to perceive complex patterns without distraction, to act with precision when necessary, and to guide outcomes subtly without imposing his will. Through this equilibrium of observation, reflection, and ethical discernment, he laid the foundation for the extraordinary abilities that would later define him. Over time, he noticed that his foresight was becoming increasingly reliable, not through force or effort, but through patience, ethical alignment, and the disciplined cultivation of awareness. He began to recognize that true insight requires humility, attentiveness, and a willingness to surrender to the flow of events rather than attempt to control them. This understanding became a guiding principle, shaping both his actions and his emerging reputation within the monastery and the surrounding community. By the end of this stage, the young monk had achieved a level of integration that few could attain. Observation, meditation, ethical reflection, and intuitive insight were seamlessly woven into his daily life. He could anticipate subtle events, guide others with precision, and maintain a profound serenity grounded in understanding rather than expectation. The seeds of his later extraordinary prediction, foreseeing the day of his own death, were firmly established, nurtured by years of patient cultivation, ethical discipline, and immersive engagement with both the human and natural worlds. The young monk's understanding of life had grown into a quiet, intricate wisdom that encompassed both the seen and unseen currents of existence. He began to recognize that human behavior, natural rhythms, and the flow of events were intertwined in ways that most people could not perceive. Each action, thought, and intention created ripples that extended far beyond immediate awareness, and by observing these ripples with patience and care, he could anticipate outcomes with remarkable subtlety. This perception was not sudden or forceful. It emerged gradually, like dawn spreading light across a valley, revealing patterns previously hidden in shadow. He noticed the delicate interplay between intention and consequence. Even the smallest acts, a word spoken softly, a glance exchanged, a gesture performed without thought, carried significance. Sometimes these minor events initiated chains of consequence that would manifest hours, days, or even weeks later. The young monk learned to observe without interference, allowing the natural flow of events to unfold while noting the signals and patterns that hinted at what was to come. In this careful attention to detail, he cultivated both foresight and patience, understanding that knowledge alone is incomplete without restraint and ethical discernment. Interactions with villagers and travelers continued to provide practical lessons in understanding human nature. He observed fear, hope, love, grief, and desire in their many forms, and learned to perceive the subtle undercurrents that guided behavior. A hesitation, a sudden smile, or a slight shift in posture could reveal more than words alone, and the monk trained himself to notice these cues with precision. Over time, he developed the ability to anticipate choices and consequences not as a form of control, but as a means of offering guidance and support aligned with the natural flow of events. This cultivated discernment became a cornerstone of his developing predictive abilities. The young monk's dreams remained a vital element of his insight. They became increasingly vivid and symbolic, providing guidance on both personal and communal matters. Some dreams hinted at events yet to occur, while others offered insight into the emotional or spiritual state of those around him. He learned to interpret these visions carefully, integrating them with his observations of daily life and natural patterns. This combination of dream insight, observation, and reflection formed a coherent system of foresight, one grounded in ethical awareness and attentive perception rather than speculation or superstition. Within the monastery, his presence grew increasingly influential, though never domineering. Fellow monks sought his counsel in times of uncertainty, drawn not by authority but by the calm assurance and clarity he exuded. He mediated conflicts with gentle insight, offered guidance in difficult decisions, and provided support to those struggling with the discipline of monastic life. Through these interactions, he honed his understanding of human behavior and the subtle dynamics of relationships, observing the effects of words, actions, and intentions on both individuals and the community as a whole. The natural world continued to serve as both teacher and mirror. The young monk observed the seasons, the weather, the growth patterns of plants, and the behavior of animals, noticing connections between environmental rhythms and human behavior. He recognized that the cycles of life, death, and renewal were not separate from the human experience but intimately linked. This awareness allowed him to perceive subtle causal relationships and anticipate events in both the immediate and extended environment. The alignment of natural and human patterns became a lens through which he could understand life's unfolding with increasing precision. He also began to notice that certain events seemed to follow larger, almost cosmic patterns. The alignment of stars, the changing of seasons, and the cycles of the moon often coincided with human behavior and community events in ways that suggested a deeper order. By observing these alignments, he could anticipate periods of prosperity, challenge, or transformation within both the monastery and surrounding villages. These insights were never used for personal gain but as a means of guidance and preparation, reinforcing his principle that foresight must always be exercised with humility and ethical restraint. The young monk developed a remarkable ability to maintain equanimity, even in the face of uncertainty. He understood that prediction was not certainty, that life contains elements beyond perception, and that events can diverge from expectation. Yet he approached these uncertainties not with fear or frustration but with calm awareness. This inner stability became a defining feature of his character, allowing him to act with clarity, offer guidance when appropriate, and observe outcomes without attachment to results. In this way, his foresight was not merely predictive, but an expression of wisdom, compassion, and disciplined attention. Through countless small interactions, observations, and reflections, the young monk began to anticipate not only events but the emotional and spiritual needs of those around him. He could sense when a villager was struggling with loss, when a fellow monk faced doubt, or when a traveler sought guidance beyond words. His responses were never intrusive, yet they carried profound accuracy, addressing both the practical and emotional dimensions of circumstance. This skill was not innate but cultivated through years of careful observation, meditation, and ethical engagement with the world. By the end of this period, the young monk had established a deeply integrated system of understanding. Observation, meditation, dream interpretation, and interaction with the natural and human worlds combined into a cohesive practice of foresight and insight. He had learned to balance attention to detail with awareness of the larger patterns of life, to anticipate events with precision while remaining humble and ethically grounded. The foundations for his most remarkable predictions, including his foretelling of his own death, were now firmly in place, the result of patient cultivation, disciplined perception, and a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. As dawn broke across the strange horizon, a gentle mist curled above the land, wrapping the trees and shoreline in a quiet, ethereal veil. The air was cool and clean, filled with the faint scent of pine and salt. The Vikings stood in silence, gazing at the world before them, realizing that their long journey, filled with storms, hunger, doubt, and discovery, had brought them not just to the edge of a map, but to the edge of understanding itself. The unknown had transformed them. What once inspired fear now stirred awe. What once felt distant and unreachable now felt intimate, almost sacred. The land no longer seemed to resist them, it seemed to listen as if acknowledging their presence. The men spoke softly as they prepared to depart, their voices blending with the whisper of the wind. They gathered the few items they had taken from the earth, smooth stones, carved wood, a handful of seeds, and left behind signs of their passage that would be swallowed by time. There was no sense of conquest in their movements, no need to claim or possess. What they had found here could not be owned. It could only be remembered. Their discovery was not of gold or treasure, but of perspective, a recognition that the world was larger, quieter, and more mysterious than they had ever imagined. They watched as the tide rose, the sea reaching out to meet them like an old friend. The water shimmered under the rising light, reflecting the vastness of the sky above. The longship, resting at the edge of the shore, seemed smaller than ever, fragile against the infinite horizon. Yet it was enough. It had carried them across storms and silence, through fear and revelation. The ocean that had once felt merciless now appeared almost compassionate, as if it too had changed during the voyage. The rhythm of waves seemed slower, more deliberate, as though the sea understood what they had endured. When they finally pushed away from the shore, the oars entered the water with a soft, steady rhythm. No one spoke for a long while. The landscape receded, swallowed by fog and distance, but it did not vanish from their minds. Each man carried a fragment of it within, a sound, a scent, an image of pale grass beneath mist or the curve of a distant hill. They knew they would speak of it differently when they returned home. Some would call it a new world. Others would describe it as the edge of all things. But all would remember it as something beyond words, a place that had changed the way they understood life itself. As the day unfolded, the sea stretched endlessly before them, vast and quiet. The men rowed with calm precision, their movements synchronized, their hearts steadied by what they had seen. The journey home would be long, but they no longer measured distance as they once had. They had crossed not just the width of an ocean, but the boundary between fear and wonder. The world was larger now, but so were they. And as the ship slipped over the water, carried by the wind and tide, it seemed that they were not leaving the edge of the world at all. They were carrying it with them, wherever they would go.